What's going on, guys? I'm your host, Jason Grubbs, and this is the Do Not Diminish podcast, the show where we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Do you remember that D.A.R.E program that we had as kids? Well, we need that same thing today when it comes to pornography and child predators. Maybe this can be the start of it. This is episode 7. Let's dive on in. Welcome to episode 7 of the Do Not Diminish podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to protect our kids from pornography and child predators. Now, as you know, the main purpose of this podcast is to strengthen us as Christians for these end times, and one of the main ways the enemy can attack us is through our kids. Many of you are parents, and if you're not a parent, you're an uncle or an auntie, or you have some type of kid that you influence in your family life. And so it's our job and it's our duty to protect them from the enemy and how he tries to ruin their minds and their lives. Today's message is going to be centered around the verse in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, where Jesus warns us, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpent and harmless as doves." So Jesus wants us to be wise. He wants us to be wise in knowing the ways of the enemy and knowing how to protect and defend ourselves from his schemes. And so I know it's a difficult topic when it comes to having conversations. Like, nobody wants to have a conversation with a 6-year-old about pornography and things like that. But we have to be wise in what's going on, and we can't bury our head in the sand. These porn companies and these child predators, they are intentionally targeting our children. It's not an accident when they come across a pornographic website or a pornographic ad or anything like that. These are schemes that these people have thought of because they make money off of it. And so we got to be aware of that so that when our kids have access to the internet, they know what to look for and what to avoid, and that they know to have those conversations with us if they do come across something like that. So we're going to deep dive into that today. Okay, so we're going to talk about why this happens and how it happens and why it's so important. Then we're going to talk about what you can do about it. And last but not least, we're going to talk about what God is going to do about it. So why does this happen? Well, on a human level, it's all about money and greed. It doesn't matter on a pornographic website if the clicks come from a full-grown adult or a kid. Those clicks are clicks, and they generate ad revenue and they generate money for these pornography companies to line people's pockets, and they don't care how they get it. And if you think that they have morals or anything like that, you can look up an account on Instagram called Exodus Cry. They are great about educating people on all the laws that are coming out, and they actually legally go after these porn companies to make sure that porn is bad in and of itself, right? But it's really destructive for kids, to make sure that they at least have rules and plans in place to make sure that people under 18 can't view it. And these porn companies fight it. You would think that they'd be like, oh yeah, we definitely want to make sure kids aren't getting access to it. No, they actually fight legislation that forces them to do that. So they definitely do not care at all. They only care about money. And even bigger than that, on a spiritual level, the enemy is all about destruction. And pornography is one of the most destructive things to the human brain. We used to think that it was just as bad as drugs, but science has found out that it's worse. It's much more stronger chemical releases in your brain, creates much more addictive habits, and the fact that most of it is accessible and free constantly, and you can't overdose on it, then that creates an even stronger bond and need for it than even regular drugs that are abusive. So there's a big motivation for the enemy and also for people to come after your kids and get them hooked on pornography at an early age. And they definitely take advantage of that, especially they take advantage of the curiosity of a kid's mind. And so that's why it happens. How it happens is through the internet and through message boards, social media sites, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all those kind of things. Even the games that they play, there are chat rooms and lobbies in those games, and they send messages through there. Ads in some of the games that they play, and the videos that they watch. I mean, I upload videos on YouTube, so now that I've been doing this for a month or so, I kind of see what the process is. And it's really one checkbox. They ask you, is this video specifically made for kids? And you say yes, or you say no. So if you're a child predator or you're one of these porn companies and you want to slip a little something in there, you say yes, and you make 90% of the video a normal kids video, and you slip a couple things in there that's going to be hard for the YouTube algorithm to detect, because there's millions of videos on YouTube, and there you go. And now you might capture that curious kid's attention for those 5 seconds, and he might click that link, and it takes him to what you wanted to do. So there's any myriad of ways that they can be reached by these people. I saw or I heard a quote in a podcast I was listening to a couple months ago, where the father was saying that once your kid has access to the internet, it's not just what they have access to, it's also who has access to them. And that's the mindset that we need to think about. Who can now contact and get a message across to my kid because they have access to the internet? So we've got to be smart about this, and we really have to take an active role, not a passive one, an active role in the kids' lives in this area to make sure that they're not being exposed to things prematurely. And if they are, to make sure that we're there to give them that guidance and give them the right lens and perspective on it so that they know what it is and they know how to stay away from it. And this is one of those subjects that unfortunately I can speak firsthand on. I remember being in middle school, and there was a certain car that I liked. It was some kind of embarrassed to admit because I'm a big Ford guy now, but it was a Chevy, and I was trying to type in Chevrolet.com so I can look up this truck, and I misspelled it and wound up on a porn site. And I don't think that was any coincidence that they made their name so similar to like one of the most popular brands in the country, right? They wanted those typos to lead right to their site, and that started me off on a battle that took years to conquer. So you don't want your kids to be exposed to porn. It's not a good thing. But what can you do? So I think there's two camps of what we can do. Number one is the camp of your kid does not own a personal smartphone and they don't have private access to the internet right now. And the other camp is your kid does have a smartphone, they do have access to the internet. And so we're gonna talk about what to do in each case. So first, we'll talk about the case where your kids don't have access to the internet yet, they don't have a personal smartphone. Now, this is good because you have an opportunity to guide them when it is time for them to get those things. You can prepare them and make sure that they're ready for that responsibility and ready for all the threats that are out there. Now, I know it's difficult keeping them away from it because even if your kid doesn't have it, I guarantee you they have friends that do. And kids always love to see and show each other stuff. So you're still gonna wanna pay attention in the second part when we talk about what to do if your kid already has access to a smartphone, because some of those things will apply to you as well. So the first thing I would say is hold off as long as possible, as long as it makes sense, to keep them away from having that smartphone and having access to the internet. You want to make sure that they're spiritually and mentally mature enough to be able to handle some of the things that are going to come at them, because it's almost unavoidable that they will see something at a certain point in time. So you want to have those age-appropriate conversations to prepare them, and you should really pray on it because every kid matures at different speeds and rates, and the environments that they grow up in are different. And so you've got to be in tune with where your kid is at and what they can handle and what information needs to be kind of withheld or slow rolled to them. You don't want to dump it all on them right away, but you also don't want to completely evade the topic and it never comes up, because they're going to get it. They're going to get exposed to it at some point in time. So what you want is for them to be prepared so that when that does happen, they know what it is and they come and talk to you about it instead of being curious and deep diving down that rabbit hole. You want them to pass it away, get rid of it, and come and tell you what happened so that you can take measures from there. So pray on how you can talk to your kids about those things when they get to the right age. Unfortunately, because of the world that we live in, that age limit is being pushed down lower and lower and lower. You guys see the news and you know what they're teaching in these public schools, and they're pushing this LGBTQ transgender agenda really heavily, even down to kindergartners and preschoolers, when they shouldn't be learning about anything sexual at all at that age. But that's the world that we live in. So we got to prepare our kids for the environment that they're going to be in. And we have to do it with a lot of prayer, because like I said, it's not easy. Even though I'm not a parent, I've been in some of those situations. I've got a younger sister and other family members and things like that. So I know how awkward that is, trying to talk about these things and trying to figure out a way to say it at the right level. So definitely pray on it, because the Holy Spirit will give you the right words and he'll give you the right actions to do. So keep that in prayer, and ask your family members for prayer too. Everybody understands the struggle. It's not anything new. It's just worse and harder in our day and age because of those little phones in our pocket. But yes, keep them away from it as long as possible. Because I saw a quote too on Instagram the other day that said, "Give a kid a smartphone when you're ready for their childhood to end." Now that's a heavy one, but I think it is true in a way, because they do get access to all that stuff, and you can't be with them 24/7 when they have their phones, right? So they could be looking at stuff without you knowing. And so you want to make sure that they're mentally and spiritually prepared before they have access to it. Okay, and I know that's not possible in every case, but for as long as you can, I would urge you to keep them away from that. And if they do need access to the internet for school and things like that, maybe you can get away with them not having a phone or a smartphone. They could have a little flip phone or something like that to communicate. But if they need access to the internet for schoolwork, then make that in a public place in the house. Set up a computer in the living room or near the kitchen or the family room, somewhere where other people are around and it's not just them by themselves. Because that way, if something does happen, first of all, you can be keeping an eye on things. And then second of all, if something does happen and you're around, you can address it right then and there on the spot. And it's not something that the kid sees on their own and then they go get curious and they're festering on it, not knowing what to think or do, and you have no idea that it happens. So make it in a public place in the house where you can monitor them. I know it can be, especially for kids, they hate to feel like the parents are being overbearing, overprotective. And that's something that we have to work out, and we have to honestly get a thicker skin sometimes, because we're not there to be our kids' best friend. Even though we want to be, we have to be their parent, which means making the hard choices and sometimes making them mad to protect them from things that are not good for them. And now let's talk about what we can do if our kids already have smartphones or already have personal access to the internet. The first thing I would say is consider taking it away. Now, I know that's going to cause a big problem, but if it's bad enough, if your situation is dire enough, then that would be the best action, is to just take it away, reduce their access, give them a dumb phone if they needed to call for rides and check in and things like that when they're not home. They can still do that with a dumb phone, but consider taking it away. I know that's an extreme thing, but it may be necessary in some cases. And the second thing I would say is, of course, like we talked about for the folks that kids don't have that yet, still have those conversations with them. As soon as you can, have those conversations at an age-appropriate level, so that they are aware. I'm sure they've already seen some things and may have questions about it, and just have been too scared to bring it up. But ask them, have you seen anything like this that's bad in this way? Has that come up? Ask them, talk about it with them. Make sure that they're aware that it exists and that it's out there and that those people want to show it to them so that they know what to do if and when they do see it. And the next thing I would say is, just like with the folks whose kids don't have smartphones yet, make sure that their access to the internet is in a public place in the house where you can monitor what they're doing and you can be there to help and prevent things that happen. You got to be able to know what's going on. If they already have social media accounts like TikTok and Instagram, things like that, you need to have access to that as well. That's another spot that's going to be a big fight with some kids. But again, you're not there to be their best friend and be buddy-buddy with them all the time. You're there to make sure that they're okay and that they can grow up at the rate at which they need to grow up and not have things sped up for them artificially. So make sure that you know what's going on. You know who's messaging them, what they're messaging about. You should have access to all of those things. And another thing you want to do, this even predates the whole phone phenomenon, but you got to know your kids' friends too. You got to know what type of crowd they're involved in, because you may do everything right to protect your kid, but their friends' parents may not be, or they may not be living in perfect situations, and so they may get exposed to these things, and then they expose it to your kid. So you got to know what kind of friends your kids have too, and also make sure, again, you have that good communication with your child so that they will feel comfortable to bring you these things if and when it comes up. Because that's pretty much, I would say, out of all the advice I have for you guys on this subject, that's probably the number one thing, is making sure you have that good communication with your child. Because if you have that, then they will alert you. They kind of do the investigative work for you, and then you can just respond to it. But we want to make sure that we're proactive and not just reactive. So all these other things are also important too. But if you've got a kid that you have that good trust relationship with, and they will tell you things and you can tell them, then that helps a lot because they can show you when something happens. And another thing you can do is implement parental controls. So all the iPhones, Android phones, and of course the web browsers on the computer, they have parental controls capabilities where you can block certain websites, certain types of websites, websites with certain ratings from being viewed. And so that does help. So definitely do that if your kid already has a device and has access to the internet. However, what I want to warn you again is don't completely rely on that. That will not do the job for you. That's just gonna help. It'll help block certain things. It won't block everything. And kids are smart, especially when it comes to phones and the internet. They're much smarter than we are because they grew up on it versus having to learn it once they were already older. And all these porn companies and sites, they know that those parental controls exist too. So they have workarounds as well. So that those blockers are not gonna do the complete job that you would hope, where you can just turn it on and then you don't have to worry about it, because they can't block everything. If a kid sees an ad on YouTube that's inappropriate, there's really not any blocker that's going to stop that unless you completely block all ads. And then they can be playing a game that has ads on their phone, and that thing can pop up whatever it wants. So I've even, if you play any games on your iPhone, sometimes I'm bored and I play a few games on there, it'll ask you like, hey, are you 16 or younger? And I'll hit yes, just because I don't want to see the junk that pops up if I don't. And even in the 16 and under category, you get inappropriate stuff. It's just in cartoon form, which is even weirder. So you gotta, you really can't rely on these things. You have to be active, monitor your kids' browsing history online, look through their messages, make sure they're not getting you messages from any inappropriate things. One of the major tactics that these porn companies and predators use is they use bot accounts, which are fake accounts made by scripting and things like that, so they can make thousands of accounts at one time, and they will just spam messages to all these Instagram accounts, all these TikTok accounts, whatever site you're on. They just spam messages, hey, blah, 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 here's a link, click this. And so your kid can be innocently minding their own business, and they get a notification, there's a message from this, and they see that profile picture, and it's like, well, what is this? And they're gonna be curious, and so they click it, and once they click that link, now they're seeing pornography. So it's really that fast, and it can really start that innocently from your kid's perspective, and that's what we're trying to prevent. So, and I have reported so many of those. I get those kind of messages since my Instagram profile is public, because I want people to be able to view the ministry stuff that I put up. I get so many of those things all the time, and no matter how many I report and block, the next day you get 5 more, 10 more. It's crazy. So literally the moment your kid makes one of those profiles, they're probably getting messages within a day or two if they post anything, right? And even if they don't post anything, if they go to search for something, say they want to search for something innocent, like, oh, I want to see the score in the Laker game on Instagram. As soon as you hit that search, that explore page pops up, and guess what they're going to put in their face? So this is why I was so urgent earlier about, if your kid doesn't have a smartphone, keep it away from them as long as you can. But if they do, then you gotta take these measures, you gotta take these steps so that you can educate them and you can protect them from this stuff, because this stuff is toxic. It literally rots their brain, and so we don't want them to get exposed to this. So the last 2 tips I have, if your kid already has access to the internet and already has a smartphone, is if they do have social media, first of all, try not to let them have a social media account, but if they do have one, make sure that it's private. This will cut down, you won't get 0, but this will cut down the amount of messages and stuff that they can get. The reason why I say it'll cut down is because if your profile is not public, it makes it harder for people to find, and when you post things, unless they're already friends with your child's account or associated in some way, right? They can't view it to respond to it, to send messages. If it's private, it makes it much more difficult, but it is still possible for them to find an account and still send a message. So make sure the account is private. And then last but not least, teach your kids about the internet and lying. They have to know how those 2 things go together like this. They gotta know what catfishing is, which is, where someone pretends to be someone else, especially with like a romantic interest involved. Because the kids are really going to be gullible for that. Heck, even full-blown adults are gullible for that. So Make sure they understand that just because someone says who they are and it has pictures does not mean that that's actually who that person is. It could be literally anyone on the other end of that account, and they have no way of knowing that for sure. So teach them about that so that they won't be as gullible. So in Luke chapter 17, verses 1 and 2, Jesus gives us a glimpse of what's going to happen to people who literally prey on our kids and prey on our children with pornography and things like that. And it says, "Then he said to the disciples, 'It is impossible that no offenses should come, but woe to him through whom they do come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung about his neck and he were thrown into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones.'" So Jesus isn't playing any games here. And if you know the Bible, you know that God always defends the weak, the innocent, the helpless, the people that can't defend themselves. And who better fits that category than kids? So for people to purposely prey on them and take advantage of their innocence, take advantage of their curiosity, and take advantage of their lack of knowledge on these things, God is going to get them really bad. If they don't repent, it is going to be, they're going to, you throw in some frozen fries into that grease pan and it pops and grease is splattering everywhere. It's going to be like that when they land in the lake of fire, because that is not a good thing to attack innocent children that God loves. So we don't have to worry about what's going to happen to those people ultimately, because we know they're going to get their just dues in the end if they don't repent and change. But for us, it's our job to protect our kids as best as possible and be wise as serpents like God told us to. And to pray and be prayerful about everything, because God will give you those opportunities to speak to your kids. He'll give you the words to say when you didn't even know what to do. He'll give you supernatural insight and knowledge, like, hey, go check on your daughter right now. Go see what your son's doing right now. Ask him this, ask her that. He will help you through this process because he knows how difficult it is. He knows we can't be everywhere all the time, right? We don't have eyes in the back of our head as much as we want to. He's going to help us raise those kids. As long as we're doing our part, God is always going to do his part. So make sure that we do our due diligence and watch over them, especially when it comes to the internet. All right, this has been episode 7 of the Do Not Diminish podcast. Please leave comments or questions below if you have any. I hope you guys have a blessed week. Peace.